everyone. We are from History of Economic Thought, Group 10. Let me introduce our group members. Our group leader is Muhammad AIMAN SYAZWAN, PREVITHA, me, TONG SEOH LIANG, no NADIA AQILLA, and no IMAN ELEYSHA. Today, we will discuss about the new classical or the Chicago School and 5 major questions and contributions of Milton Friedman, Robert Lucas, and Gary S. Becker in developing the ideas of the school. There are 6 parts in our discussion. The first part is introduction and continue with 5 major tenets: Milton Friedman, Robert Emerson Lucas, Gary S. Becker, and conclusion. Introduction. What is Chicago School of Economics? Chicago School is a neoclassical economic school of thought that originated at the University of Chicago in the 1930s. The Chicago School includes monetarist beliefs about the economy, contending that the money supply should be kept in equilibrium with the demand for money. Milton Friedman and George S. Stigler established the school's unique identity, while Robert Emerson Lucas and Gary S. Becker continue the tradition of Chicago School.
Good day, my name is PREVITHA KANASVARAN, matrix number 289793. I will be discussing the 5 major tenets. First major tenet would be optimizing behavior. Second is the observed price and wages. Third is the mathematical orientation. Fourth major tenet is the rejection of Keynesianism. And fifth will be the limited government intervention. The first major tenet of optimizing behavior builds on the idea that individuals act rationally to maximize their well-being. This rational behavior is foundational to neoclassical economics and has far-reaching implications for understanding economic decision-making. For the first point, rational choices and trade-offs. Individuals make decisions by comparing the expected benefits and cost. They aim to achieve the best possible outcome given their preferences and constraints, such as limited resources like time and money. For example, a consumer might choose between purchasing a luxury good or saving for future needs based on their perceived utility of each option. Second, the stable preferences. The Chicago School assumes that individual preferences are relatively stable over time and not easily influenced by external factors such as price changes. While preferences might evolve due to personal growth or societal shifts, they are generally treated as constants in economic models. The third point is uncertainty and information cost. In reality, decision makers face uncertainty because of future outcomes are unknown. To mitigate this, they seek additional information. However, obtaining information has cost, time, effort, or money. The rational individual or firm only acquires information up to the point where the marginal benefit, which is the added value of being better informed, equals the marginal cost. Marginal cost is the expense of acquiring the information. For instance, a job seeker might research potential employers but stop once the effort outweighs the potential advantage. The fourth point here is the monetary incentives and disincentives. Individuals, workers, and firms respond predictably to financial rewards and penalties. For example, consumers are likely to purchase more when price decreases and less when prices increases. Workers may choose to work overtime when offered higher wages, but reduced hours of taxes make additional income less rewarding. Firms invest in production if profit opportunities rise, but may reduce output if penalties or cost increase. The second major tenet talks about the efficiency of markets and the ability of prices and wages to approximate their long-run competitive levels. First, the prices and wages as long-run competitive indicators. Observed prices and wages generally align with their long-term competitive levels because markets tend towards equilibrium over time. In a competitive market, prices reflect the opportunity cost of goods and services, balancing supply and demand. Wages represent the opportunity cost of labor, reflecting workers' productivity at the margin. For example, A company paying workers more than their productivity value would face pressure to adjust wages to remain competitive. Similarly, goods priced above or below market value create incentives for adjustments through entry or exit of producers. The second point is monopoly or monopsony, which is the minimal long run impact. The Chicago School argues that the market imperfections like monopoly is a single seller, or monopsony, a single buyer, typically have limited long-term consequences. For monopoly prices, while monopolies might set prices above competitive levels in the short term, the entry of new firms or technologies eventually erodes their dominance unless the government restricts competition, which is through license or trade barriers. For innovation as a check, even in heavily monopolized markets, innovation fosters competition. For instance, the rise of streaming platforms like Netflix disrupted the cable TV monopolies. The third point is the role of property rights and private negotiation. Establishing clear property rights and fostering private negotiations are seen as key tools to minimize externalities. Externalities are unintended costs or benefits that affect third parties. When we look into externalities, without clear ownership, resources can be overused, which is negative externality like pollution, or underutilized, which is positive externality like public parks. When we look into private negotiations, the Chicago School emphasizes solutions like the Coase theorem, which suggests that externalities can often be resolved efficiently through bargaining if property rights are well defined and transaction costs are low. The fourth point here is the institutional arrangements and market forces. Certain wage and price setting mechanisms like seniority pay, union contracts, or executive salaries may seem disconnected from market forces, but they often align with competitive principles when viewed in contexts like seniority pay. Firms use seniority based wages as incentives for loyalty and to minimize turnover costs, which can maximize long term efficiency. When we look into large executive salaries, high pay for executives reflects the value they create by effectively managing large organizations. It is often tied to their marginal contributions to the firm's success. Whereas union contracts, while unions negotiate higher than market wages, the resulting costs are passed on to consumers or managed through productivity gains. In competitive markets, excessive demands would lead to business closure or relocation. The third major tenet here is this mathematical orientation. This mathematical orientation reflects its commitment to precise, rigorous analysis and the development of testable economic theories. The first point here is the mathematical theorizing, a core methodology. Mathematics is used to formalize economic relationships, ensuring clarity and logical consistency. The key methods include Marshallian partial equilibrium analysis. This analysis focuses on a specific market or sector while holding other variables constant. Useful for analyzing supply and demand in isolation to derive clear conclusions about price and quantity equilibrium. For example, studying how a tax on cigarettes affects the cigarette market without immediately considering its effect on other markets. The second analysis is Walrasian general equilibrium analysis. This analysis examines how all markets in an economy interact simultaneously, focuses on achieving equilibrium where supply equals demand across all goods and services. For example, understanding how a change in the labor market might influence consumption, production, and savings across the entire economy. The second point is emphasis on empirical verification. The Chicago School places a high importance on testing theories against real-world data. Economists from this school argue that theories must ultimately be validated or refuted by their predictive power. While their theorizing is often conducted by Chicago economists themselves, the empirical testing is sometimes left to others such as econometricians or applied researchers. Theoretical models are designed to be simple yet powerful, capturing key economic dynamics while being accessible for empirical validation. For example, Milton Friedman's permanent income hypothesis (PIH) theorized the consumption depends more on long-term income expectations than current income. While Friedman formulated the theory, its empirical testing involved extensive data analysis by other researchers. The third point is the contrast with the neo-Austrian school. The Chicago School's mathematical and empirical focuses stands in contrast to the neo-Austrian school, which emphasizes the qualitative reasoning, dynamic subjective process, critique of equilibrium. The qualitative reasoning shows the neo-Austrians often avoid heavy reliance on mathematics, favoring verbal logic and narrative analysis, whereas the dynamic subjective process they focus on processes like entrepreneurial discovery and spontaneous order, which are harder to model mathematically. The critique of equilibrium, neo-Austrians argue that the real-world markets rarely achieve equilibrium, emphasizing disequilibrium and constant adjustment instead. The fifth point is the limitations and critiques. Oversimplification, where the critics argue that the focus on mathematical models can oversimplify complex economic realities, neglecting behavioral nuances and institutional factors. The second assumptions of rationality shows that Chicago models often assume perfectly rational actors and efficient markets, which behavioral economies have challenged. The delegation of empirical work shows leaving empirical verifications to others can sometimes lead to a gap between theory and practice. The fourth major tenet is the rejection of Keynesianism. The Chicago School's rejection of Keynesianism stems from its foundational belief in the self-regulating nature of markets and its emphasis on monetary policy as the primary driver of economic outcomes. The first point is the economy as self-adjusting. The Chicago School views the economy as inherently stable, with market forces naturally moving it toward equilibrium. Minor fluctuations are small deviations in economic activity. For example, temporary dips in output or employment are seen as self-correcting. For instance, a short-term drop in demand may lead to price adjustments that restore equilibrium. For severe recession or depressions, unlike Keynesians who attribute deep downturns to inherent instability or drops in aggregate demand, Chicago economists argue that these crises typically results from inappropriate monetary policy. For example, Milton Friedman and Anna famously blamed the Great Depression on the Federal Reserve's failure to prevent a collapse in the money supply. The second point is the role of monetary policy. The Chicago School asserts the changes in the money stock directly influence nominal GDP, which comprises real output and the price levels. This connection is captured in the quantity theory of money, which is MV equals to PQ. M is a money supply, P is velocity of money, P will be price level, and Q will be real GDP. According to this view, increased money supply leads to a proportional rise in nominal GDP, either through higher prices or increased output, whereas monetary changes work independently of interest rates, challenging Keynesian models that rely on interest rates to mediate the effects of monetary policy. The third point is the critique of fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, or the government spending and taxation, is seen as ineffective unless it is accompanied by changes in the money supply. For example, when government spending alone without monetary expansion, increased government spending merely shapes resources within the economy rather than boosting total output. The crowding out effect is when the higher government spending can lead to higher interest rates, which reduce private investment, limiting the overall impact on aggregate demand. Even when fiscal policy is paired with monetary changes, it can be ineffective in the presence of rational expectations. Rational expectations is if people anticipate that fiscal expansion, which is the stimulus spending, will lead to future tax hikes or inflation. They may adjust their behavior, saving more or demanding higher wages, thereby neutralizing the policy's intended effects. The fourth point here is the inflation as a monetary phenomenon. The Chicago School firmly rejects the cost push inflation theory, which attributes rising prices to factors like wage increases or supply chain disruptions like oil shocks. Instead, they assert that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, it occurs only when the money supply grows faster than the economy's productive capacity. For instance, sustained inflation cannot be explained solely by rising wages or input costs unless these are supported by excessive monetary expansion. Tenet is the limited government intervention. Chicago School's advocacy for limited government stems from its belief in the efficiency of markets and skepticism about government intervention. This position reflects on an understanding of government as prone to inefficiency, misaligned incentives to regulatory capture. The first point here is the government inefficiency. The Chicago School argues that the government as an economic agent is inherently less efficient than markets in allocating resources. This inefficiency arises for several reasons. For example, lack of market discipline. Unlike private firms that face competition and must operate efficiently to survive, government agencies lack similar incentives. Inefficient bureaucracies often persist because they are funded through taxation rather than customer satisfaction or profits. The next is the diffuse incentives, where government decision makers, for example politicians or bureaucrats, are not directly accountable to consumers. This weakens their incentive to allocate resources effectively to respond to changing conditions. The second point is self-interest in government. Public choice theory, which is a cornerstone of this argument, is public choice theory, which applies economic principles to political behavior. It assumes that government officials, like all individuals, act in their self-interest. For example, politicians prioritize policies that maximize their chances of re-election, even if those policies are inefficient or harmful in the long run. Next, bureaucrats aim to expand their budgets, staff, or influence, often at the expense of taxpayers. Resource diversion is as a result of this self-interest, government officials may divert resources toward projects or policies that serve their personal objectives, for example, political alliances, prestige projects, rather than public good. The third point is critique of government regulation. The Chicago School is particularly critical of government regulation, arguing that it often fails to serve the public interest. Regulatory capture. Regulations are frequently influenced or controlled by the very industries they are supposed to oversee. Firms and interest groups lobby for rules that benefit them, such as creating barriers to entry for competitors, securing subsidies or favorable treatment, using regulations to entrench monopolistic advantages. Benefiting special interests is where regulations tend to benefit the politically organized and influential, for example, large corporations or unions at the expense of general public. For example, licensing laws can restrict competition, raising costs for consumers. Environmental rules may disproportionately favor certain firms or industries. The next point is preference for private exchange. The Chicago School favors private markets over government intervention for several reasons. The first reason is efficiency, where private markets driven by competition and profit motives allocate resources more efficiently than centralized planning. The second reason is innovation, where markets foster innovation as firms compete to attract consumers by offering better goods and services. The third reason is responsiveness, where businesses are directly accountable to customers, incentivizing them to meet consumer needs more effectively than governments. The sixth point is the policy implications. Given its skepticism of government, the Chicago School advocates minimal government intervention, where the government's role should be limited to enforcing property rights, maintaining law and order, and ensuring a stable monetary system. Deregulation is where eliminating unnecessary regulations allow markets to function more freely and efficiently. Privatization is where transferring services or industries like utilities, transportation from public to private ownership often improves efficiency and performance. Next, we will look into whom did the Chicago School benefit or seek to benefit. The School of Economics has had a broad and multi-phased influence, benefiting different groups in various ways while challenging others. These are an exploration of whom the Chicago School sought to benefit directly or indirectly, and its broader societal and political implications. First, the beneficiaries of the Chicago School's economic views. The Chicago Schools emphasizes on free markets, minimal government intervention, and competitive capitalism, has appealed to and benefited several key groups, such as general population and society at large, where increased economic freedom. The Chicago Schools' advocacy for free markets aims to maximize economic freedom, which they argue is critical for individual and collective well-being. By reducing barriers to competition, such as excessive regulation or monopolistic practices, the Chicago approach seeks to foster innovation, reduce cost, and expand consumer choice. It also affects the corporate interest, where many corporations have gained significantly from the widespread acceptance of Chicago school principles, where reduced regulations, the Chicago perspective on deregulation minimizes government oversight and compliance costs, freeing businesses to operate more efficiently. The argument that corporate mergers are a natural and beneficial aspect of corporate control aligns with corporate interests, allowing companies to consolidate for strategic or financial gains. Chicago economists defend advertising as a mechanism that informs consumers, enhancing competition and benefiting businesses by legitimizing their marketing efforts. The schools view that the tax system should focus on raising revenue rather than redistributing income. Disproportionately benefits high-income groups and corporations. Next, it also affects the political conservatism. The Chicago School played a crucial role in providing intellectual support to political conservatism, particularly in the United States post-World War II. Economists like Milton Friedman and George Stigler championed ideas that aligned with conservative principles such as limited government, free enterprise, and reduced taxation, helping to shape policy agendas. Next, let's look into the groups challenged by the Chicago School's views. While many benefited, others faced disadvantages from the application of Chicago School's principles. The first group is the groups relying on government support, such as farm interests. The Chicago School opposes subsidies and price supports, which are lifelines for many in the agricultural sector. Next, for the government employees. Unions and professional groups representing government workers often resist Chicago-style economics because it promotes smaller government and reduced regulatory scope. Third is the subsidized industries. Sectors dependent on government aid, such as firms seeking bailouts, lose support under the Chicago framework, which views such interventions as market distortions. Next is the advocates of redistribution. The school's opposition to using the tax system for income redistribution directly challenges policies aimed at reducing inequality. This perspective can disadvantage lower income groups or those advocating for a more equitable distribution of wealth. The protectionist in licensing advocates is the next. They import quotas, where Chicago economists argue against artificial trade barriers like import quotas, which protect domestic industries but limit consumer choice and competition. Occupation licensing, they critique unnecessary licensure as an artificial barrier to entry that inflates wages for established professionals at the expense of new entrants and consumers. The third point is the broader societal and political impact. The Chicago School's ideas extend beyond economic policy to influence broader societal and political dynamics, strengthening laissez-faire capitalism. Following the Great Depression and World War II, laissez-faire capitalism faced discredit. The Chicago School revitalized these ideas by combining rigorous scientific analysis with accessible communication. Milton Friedman's books such as Capitalism and Freedom and Free to Choose popularized these views among the general public and policymakers. Intellectual foundation for conservatism. The Chicago School filled a vacuum in intellectual conservatism, becoming a cornerstone for free market advocates during the mid-20th century. This influence was amplified by economists who would effectively communicate complex ideas in ways that resonate with the public. Next is the limits on political ideologies. While aligning with political conservatism, Chicago School principles also challenged traditional conservative practices such as protectionist policies, or subsidies for private industries.
My presentation will discuss the Chicago School of Economics, specifically addressing its validity, usefulness, and correctness during its time. The first one is role of the Chicago School. The Chicago School played a crucial role in economics by strengthening the marginalist tradition during a period when it was losing popularity. While Keynesian economics was dominating the intellectual scene, the Chicago School provided a counterbalance by preserving the core ideas of classical and neoclassical economics. This ensured the continuation of key economic principles that might have otherwise faded away. Next, contrast with Keynesianism. At the time, Keynesian economics was widely embraced, and most economists focused on macroeconomic ideas. However, the Chicago School emphasized microeconomic analysis, shifting attention to concepts such as job search theories and how people balance work and leisure over time. This perspective was essential in offering a more detailed understanding of unemployment and labor economics. Another significant contribution of the Chicago School was its focus on monetary theories. Influenced by economists like Irving Fisher and Milton Friedman, the school emphasized the relationship between inflation and unemployment. During the 1970s and 1980s, when rapid inflation captured national attention, the Chicago School's insight became especially valuable. They argue that Keynesian policies such as prioritizing income policies to address unemployment could lead to unintended negative side effects. Lastly, legacy of the New Classicism. The Chicago School also laid the foundation for New Classicism, which rejected the idea for a long-term trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Instead, it promoted classical ideas, including economic efficiency, price stability, and achieving natural full employment. This optimistic perspective continues to influence economic thinking today. In conclusion, the Chicago School was both valid and useful in its time. It provided a much-needed balance to the Keynesian dominance of the era by focusing on macroeconomic analysis and preserving classical economics. Its contribution to the monetary theory and labor economics remain influential even today. In this part of my presentation, I will discussing the lasting contribution of the Chicago School of Economics. While it's still debated which of these contributions will stand the test of time, many of their ideas have already had a profound impact on the field economics. One of the most significant contributions of the Chicago School has been its role in popularizing and integrating new classical ideas into economics education. These ideas are now deeply embedded in curriculum of university, especially in the United States. For instance, concepts such as the natural rate of unemployment have reshaped the way we think about labor market, showing that there's a baseline level of unemployment even in a healthy economy. The theory of the rational expectation has also been transformative. This concept assumes that individuals and businesses use all available information to make economic decisions, challenging earlier models that underestimated how people adapt to policy changes. Additionally, the long-run vertical Phillips curve has become a cornerstone of macroeconomics. It emphasized that over time, inflation does not reduce unemployment and that the two are unrelated in the long run. Lastly, the distinction between short-run and long-run aggregate supply provides a clear framework for analyzing how economists respond to shock and adjust over time. Together, these ideas have formed the backbone of modern macroeconomic theory. Moving on, the Chicago School has also made lasting contribution to labor economics. Their theories emphasize the importance of human capital, essentially education, skills, and experience that workers bring to the job market. This concept has become vital for understanding how investments in education and training contribute to the economic growth. They also introduce ideas on household production, which recognize the economic value of unpaid labor performed at home. These insights have broadened how we measure economic productivity and well-being. Furthermore, the Chicago School's work on job search theories provides an analytical approach to understanding unemployment. It examines how workers find jobs and the time it takes to match with suitable employers. This has implications for designing labor market policies that reduce unemployment rates. Finally, their research on discrimination has become critical in exploring wage gaps and workplace inequality. These insights have informed public policy that help shape debates on creating more inclusive labor markets. Another key contribution of the Chicago School is their support for flexible foreign exchange rate. This idea has become standard in international economic textbook, is widely accepted in global economic policy. Under a flexible exchange rate system, the value of a country's currency is determined by market forces rather than being fixed to another currency or a commodity like gold. This approach allows countries to adjust the economic shocks more effectively. It also provides flexibility for central banks to focus on domestic goals such as controlling inflation or stimulating growth without being constrained by a fixed exchange rate system. The emphasis on flexible exchange rate reflects the Chicago School's broader belief in the power of free markets and minimal government intervention. Another influential but sometimes controversial idea from the Chicago School is the cost theorem, developed by economist Ronald Coase. This theorem addresses the issue of externalities, situations where one person's actions affect another's, such as pollution. The cost theorem argues that if properties rights are well defined and transaction costs are low, private negotiation for government intervention. For example, if a factory's pollution harms nearby residents, the two parties could negotiate a solution that benefits both sides, such as the factory paying the resident or investing in cleaner technology. While this idea has been debated and criticized, it remains a foundational concept in public finance and environmental economics. It challenges traditional regulatory approaches by emphasizing market-based solutions to the externalities. In conclusion, the Chicago School's ideas have already had a profound impact on economics, shaping both academic theories and public policy. Their work has redefined how we think about labor market, monetary policy, international trade, and externalities. However, as the text notes, some of these contributions are still relatively recent, and their long-term value will ultimately be judged by future generations. For instance, monetarism, one of their most prominent contributions, lost some of its support during the 1980s and 1990s. Despite this, many ideas from the Chicago School, broadly defined, are likely to remain influential for years to come. As we continue to study and apply these ideas, it will be up to future economists, policymakers, and even our children and grandchildren to assess their lasting significance.
Milton Friedman. He was born in 1912 to Jewish immigrants. He was an American economist and statistician who received the 1979 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Science for his research on consumption analysis, monetary history and theory, and the complexity of stabilization policy. Friedman was among the intellectual leaders of the Chicago School of Economics, a neoclassical school of economic thought associated with the work of the faculty and at the University of Chicago that rejected Keynesianism in favor of monetarism until the mid-1970s, when it turned to neoclassical macroeconomics heavily based on the concept of rational expectation.
Okay, I will continue what my friend present about Milton Friedman, and I will continue consumption function. In 1957, he published a theory of the consumption function, suggested that the Keynesian consumption function is too simplistic, and the period of observation from a day to a week would eliminate the error in this example, but in terms of actual consumption income data, the use of a period of even 1 year fails to correct the problem. According to Friedman, a household consumption is determined by permanent income rather than the current income, and where permanent income is defined as the average income that people expect to receive over a period of years. Stated differently, consumption does not respond to every change in income caused by change in investment or government spending. Next, I will continue about monetary theory. Friedman is best known for his ideas on the role of money in the economy, discussed several interrelated topics including the demand for money, the quantity theory of money, the causes of the Great Depression, the ineffectiveness of fiscal policy, the long-run vertical Phillips curve, and the monetary rules. So, firstly, the demand for money. Friedman viewed the demand for money as the demand for cash balance, and people demand cash balance because they provide utility to the holder. Unlike Keynes, Friedman made no distinction between type of money, that is, between idle versus active balance or transaction versus speculative balance. In money theory, demand of money, we have three key points. Firstly is total wealth. Total wealth in all forms, including human capital, can best be measured by permanent income. As well, all permanent income increases, the amount of money people desire to hold as cash balances also increases. Second, cost of holding money. Higher costs will result in less money being held. These costs vary with the interest rate, the expected rate of inflation, and the price level. And lastly, preferences or basic attitude about holding and using cash are the third major determinant of money demand. Friedman asserted that this preference remained relatively constant over significant stretches of space and time. In monetary theory topic gain, the modern quantity theory of money. According to Friedman, the demand of money is relatively stable in the short run, and the Federal Reserve (FED) system controls the supply of money. An increase in the supply of money will leave people holding cash balance in excess of amount they want. So they will attempt to rid themselves of this excess transaction asset by spending cash and writing checks. According to Friedman, the modern quantity theory of money is established, and the attempt by people to rid themselves of cash balances will drive up the demand for goods and services and increase the output, prices, or some combination of each. Okay, still in monetary theory topic, the cause of the Great Depression and the monetary rule. In chapter 7 of their book, Friedman and Schwartz reached the controversial conclusion that monetary policy was largely responsible for causing the Great Depression of the 1930s. And we go to the monetary rule. Recall that learner has like the economy to a car without a steering wheel. Friedman counter as follows: the car will get down the road just fine as long as the government does not destabilize it. There are 4 reasons such a rule is needed: the past performance of the Fed, limitation of economic knowledge, confidence, and neutralization of the Fed. And lastly, economic liberalism. Friedman described himself as a 19th century liberal. He was referring, of course, to the economic liberalism that we associate with the classical economists who emphasize economic freedom. Thus, over the years, he advocated a series of reforms that would place less reliance on government and more reliance on the market. Friedman's admirers and critics alike agree that helped establish that money matters in the economy. As stated by Samuelson, if Milton Friedman had not existed, it would have been necessary to invent him.
Hi, good day to Doctor. My name is LIANG, matrix number 293811. So I will continue present the new classical economist named Robert Emerson Lucas. So I will start with his biography. He was born in 1937, September 15, in Yakima, Washington, USA. And at his early stage, he enrolled at the University of Chicago with engineering, but shifted to history. And he graduated with a BA in history in 1959. So he continued his PhD program in University of Chicago and received his PhD in economics in 1964. So I will continue to talk about some interesting facts about Lucas. The first one, an accidental economics. So initially, his academic interests lay in history, which he pursued during his undergraduate studies. His early fascination with history revolved around understanding societal developments, human behavior, and how events shape the world. This background gave him the solid grounding in analytical thinking and a broad perspective on social structures. And the shift to economics came during his time in graduate school, which is a decision driven by the realization that economics provide a powerful tools for analyzing and quantifying human behavior and the social system. So unlike history, economics enable Lucas to apply some quantitative analysis to the question that intrigued him. It is the question that about how people make decisions and how policy affect economic and how these dynamics evolve over time. Now the second fact is a personal experience shaping his own economic view. So Lucas' views on the economic and policy were deeply influenced by his own life experience, particularly those involving personal financial hardship. In the 1970s, Lucas faced a significant personal challenge when he went through a divorce. This event had a major financial impact due to the Illinois Properties Division law at the time, which led him to lose a substantial part of his asset. This personal encounter with economy laws and financial planning highlight the real-world implication of policy and economic decision even on individual levels. So this experience actually gives Lucas a unique perspective on the practical impact of economic policy and it actually helped his academic work. It reminds him that economy theories and models are not just abstract theories and models. It have a real consequence to people's lives. And this perspective insight reinforced his belief in the importance of understanding how individuals adapt their behavior when policy change. So the next one will be the major contribution of Lucas in economics. It has a three major contribution. First, rational expectation. Second, the island model. And third, the critique. I'll continue in the next slide. So moving on to the first contribution is a thinking of Lucas, which is a rational expectations. It is a key concept in economy that suggests that people normally make decisions based on the best information available to them and also their understanding of how the economy works. So, rational expectation assume that people always use all available information when forecasting the future of an economy. So, I will give you a real world example here. Let's say, suppose a central bank announced that it will increase the money supply to combat low economic growth, right? If people have rational expectation about it, they will anticipate that this could lead to inflation. So the workers might ask for a higher wage to keep up with the expected price increase and to keep up the inflation. So the businesses might raise their price in advance, and this behavior could lead to inflation without any actual economy increase in actual economy output. So it is actually neutralizing the central bank policy. So actually this theory helped to explain why traditional economy models that don't factor in change in expectation can sometimes fail to predict the real-world economy outcomes accurately. And I will continue with implication of rational expectation in real-life example in the next slide. Now this is the implication of rational expectation, and this is the initial Philip curve showing the trade-off between inflation and output when the inflation expectations are at the point A. So if the left hand side is a panel A, rational expectation, and the right hand side is panel B, effective expectation. Now with the rational expectation, people quickly understand and believe in the new policy when the central bank announced a lower inflation target. So what happened is the economy moved directly from point A to point Z. This means that there is no loss in the productions as inflation expectation change immediately. So if people trust the central bank action, inflation and output adjust right away without disruptions. But however, in the active expectation, when people don't fully trust the new policy at first, they will change their expectations slowly based on their past inflation or based on their past thinking. So what happened is the economy moved from A to B, and from B to C, and finally from C to Z. And during the process, we can see that there is a loss of outputs. So meaning that in an adaptive expectation, when people change their expectations slowly, there is a temporary drop in output as they adapt to the new policy. So in conclusion, I'll continue with the island model. What is island model? It is an influential concept used to illustrate how information limitation can impact an economy decision making. The island model was introduced to demonstrate how rational expectations operate when there is imperfect information. So in this model, the economy is represented as a collection of many isolated islands, each with its own local market. So try to imagine yourself that our economy is actually like a island, like isolated island. So the producer on each island have limited information about the price and economic conditions of the other island. So I will give a real life situation. The island model explains why economic policy such as monetary expansions can have a real short-term effect if people are initially unaware of whether a price change is due to the monetary policy or a shift in demand for specific goods. It highlights the importance of information flow in the economy and why transparent communication from central bank can influence how effective monetary policy is, as every own island has its own markets, own pricing, and they do not share the information to the other island. Now the last one is the Lucas critique about the traditional economy models. It points out that the traditional economy models that use only past data to predict future outcome can be unreliable when policy change. He argues that this model fails because they do not consider how people behavior change when they know about or expect a policy change. This critique implies that policymakers need to consider how people will adapt to policy change. Simply applying past data or empirical relationship might not be good enough to anticipate the outcome of a new policy. So let me give you an example. Lucas' critique can be seen in the relationship between inflation and unemployment, as described by the Philip curve. The Philip curve suggests that there is a trade-off between inflation and employment, meaning that policymakers can reduce unemployment by accepting a higher inflation. However, the Lucas critique suggests that this relationship might not hold if individuals expect policymakers to pursue inflationary policy. So, if individuals expect a higher inflation in the future, they might demand for higher wages, which could lead to a higher inflation and no reduction in unemployment. That's all from me. Thank you.
Greetings to Prof. Lim. My name is Nur IMAN ELEYSHA BINTI KHAIRUDIN and my metric number is 294585. I will explain about Gary Stanley Becker and some of his theories. Gary S. Becker was a prominent American economist born in 1930 in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. He earned his PhD from the University of Chicago, where he later became a university professor with joint appointments in the economic and sociology departments. In addition to his academic achievement, Becker wrote a monthly column for Business Week. where he applied his economic insight to current events and public policy discussion. His legacy continues through his extensive. In addition to his academic achievements, Baker wrote a monthly column for Business Week where he applied his economic insights to current events and public policy discussion. His legacy continues through his extensive writings and the ongoing relevance of his theories in understanding complex social phenomena. Baker's influence in economics is profound, particularly through his seminal books. Firstly, The Economics of Discrimination, 1957, Human Capital, 1964, A Treatise on the Family, 1981, The Economic Approach to Human Behavior, 1976, and lastly, Economic Theory. Gary S. Baker, a prominent economist, believed that the neoclassical economic theory could explain all human behavior through three key principles. Number one, rational choice. Individuals make decisions to maximize their utility based on rational calculations of potential outcomes. Number two, market equilibriums. Markets tends towards individual behaviors contributing to this stability. Number three, stable preferences. People have consistent preferences over time, allowing for predictable behavior in economic models. Economic Perspective on Discrimination. In 1957, Baker published The Economics of Discrimination, which introduced an economic approach to understanding discrimination. Discrimination is treated as a taste or preferences for which employers are willing to pay a price. When an employer discriminates, they incur a non-monetary cost in favor of maintaining their discriminatory preference. Number two, discrimination coefficients. The discrimination coefficient represents the non-monetary cost an employer associates with hiring a discriminate group. If an employer discriminates, they compare the market wage to the perceived wage, which includes an additional cost for discrimination. A concrete example will help clarify these ideas. Suppose that the market wage rate is $6 and that employer D is 0.5. Then, from the employer's perspective, the wage rate for the group discriminates against is. As written in the above calculation, this implies that the prejudiced employer would be willing to pay a premium of up to $3 per hour in hiring preferred worker as opposed to the group targets by prejudice. Higher values of these suggest a stronger taste for discrimination. If D is 0, on the other hand, the employer is unprejudiced. Impact on the labour market. Discrimination increased demand for preferred workers, causing wage disparities. Discriminating employers face higher labour costs, reducing their competitiveness. In the long run, only one discriminatory employers remain competitive as discrimination results in extra avoidable costs. Firstly, discrimination in the labour market. Employers who discriminate, for example, select workers based on gender, race, or religion, will hire workers they like, resulting in higher demand for those workers. The wage of a favored worker who are selected based on discrimination will be higher than those of equally productive but Secondly, survival in competitive market. In a competitive market, only the firms with the lowest cost will survive. Firms that discriminate will suffer or losses because their costs are higher. Thirdly, discrimination reduction processes. In theory, the market will reduce discrimination because firms that discriminate cannot compete. Government needs to resist pressure from the stakeholder who try to restrict free employment choice and allow discrimination to occur. Number 4, role of the competitive market and government. In a competitive market, discriminatory behavior will ultimately lead to losses for employers who cannot afford to pay the higher costs associated with their preferences. Over time, competition tends to reduce discrimination, whether based on gender, race, or religion, because it imposes costs of discriminator. The government should support these reductions by resisting pressure from interest groups and ensuring the occupational choices remain open and free, enabling the market to work efficiently in eliminating discrimination. Theory of allocation of time. Critique of traditional theory. The critique of traditional theory is that neoclassical theory assumes consumption happens instantly, whereas Becker argues that consumption takes time, which is limited and valuable, and the full cost of goods includes not just the market price but also the value of the time spent on consumption. Number 2, reconstructions of choice theory. Becker's reconstructions of choice theory proposed that households act as both producers and consumers of utility-producing commodities, where producing these commodities requires not only goods purchased in the market but also time spent on both production. For example, like cooking, and consumptions like eating, as seen in the example of preparing and eating breakfast with food items like eggs, breads, and juice. Number 3, household decisions. Households make decisions on what commodities to consume and how to produce them, with a key factor being that some commodities are time-intensive while others are good-intensive, depending on whether they require more time or goods to acquire. Number 4, implications of Becker's model. A shift in consumption patterns. Number 2, technology and productivity. And number 3 is family choices on children. Impact of Becker's model. Shifting consumption patterns. As earning from labor market time rise, people are likely to shift from consuming time-intensive commodity to good-intensive ones, because the opportunity cost of time spent on household productions and consumption increase. Similarly, people may to eat out at a restaurant rather than spend time preparing a meal at home. Increase productivity of household productions. When the productivity of household production increase, for example through innovations like microwave ovens, washing machines, or trash compactors, it frees up time that can be used for other activities, either more consumption time like watching TV, more labor markets time, working more hours, or a mix of both. A family decision based on earnings potential. In families where both spouses have high earnings potential, they are likely to have fewer children and focus more on good intensive family experiences. For example, vacation, dining out. In contrast, families where one spouse has a low earnings potential and chooses not to work may have more children and engage in more time-intensive family activities like home cooks, meals, or gardening. Becker uses economic theory to analyze family behavior, include time allocation, marriage, and divorce in different societal contexts. He aims to provide a systematic understanding of these aspects, using assumptions of maximizing behavior and stable preferences. So, there are several things that can be discussed, such as theory of marriage, fertility, altruism, and divorce. Theory of marriage, divisions of labor. Marriage enables partners to specialize in different tasks. The person with the highest market reach typically engage in paid work, while the one with greater relative productivity in household tasks focuses on the domestic work. For example, traditionally, this has often been the woman in the household. Specializations and skill differences. Small differences in productive capacity between partners can lead to large differences in how time is allocates between work, household productions, and leisure. Engaging the specific task increases one's human capital and productivity in those areas which encourage specializations. Marriage as an economic contract. Marriage often includes a long-term commitment with protections against abandonment and adversity. Historically, this has been crucial for women who typically specialize in childbearing and domestic work, leading them to seek long-term security in marriage. Positive sorting. Marriage often involves positive sorting, where individuals with complementary skills, for example, one partner has high market productivity and the other excels in household productions, are more likely to pair up. This complementary increases the overall productivity of the household as each partner contributes uniquely to the household's full income. Fertility. Children as durable capital. Children add to the family's overall welfare, but they are costly, which limits family size. Costs includes both direct expenses such as food, shelter, education, and opportunity costs or time spent raising children. Cost and trade-off in your fertility decisions. Fertility depends on the cost of children, parental income, and a trade-off between quantity and quality of children. As women have more work opportunities, families option for fewer but higher quality children, focusing on better education and health. Impact of environments and welfare programs. Rural families historically had more children than urban families due to lower costs in rural areas. Welfare programs reduce the cost of raising children and tend to increase fertility rates. Becker's theory of altruism explains how altruism's linked utility plays a crucial role in family dynamic, enhancing the potential benefits of marriage and family life. Here, the key points. Firstly, altruism and linked utility. Altruism occurs when one person's happiness or utility increases because someone else's utility rises. In a family, the joy or well-being of one member can increase the well-being of others, making the family's collective utility higher than the sum of individual utilities. Gains from marriage. Altruism adds to the potential gains from marriage as family members' happiness can be intertwined. For example, a parent's joy from seeing their child happy contributes to the parent's own well-being. The rotten kid theorem. Becker's rotten kid theorem illustrates that even selfish family members, like troublesome children, will act in ways that maximize the family's income or resources. This is because their own future well-being depends on the family's overall prosperity. Thus, even selfish members will avoid actions that harm the family, as it would reduce their potential benefit. Self-interest versus altruism. While selfish members may act in their own self-interest, they are constrained by altruism, recognizing that harming the family reduces their own future well-being. However, this altruistic restraints weakens as a number of beneficiaries increase, for example, in a larger families or organization. Becker's theory of divorce explains that marriage partners often make decisions based on incomplete information, and divorce may occur when new information reveals that the marriage is no longer optimal. Here are the key points. Search of a mate. When people look a marriage partner, they invest time, efforts, and other resources in the search process. The longer the search, the longer the delay in gaining the benefits of marriage. A rational person will search for a mate until the marginal cost, time and resources and marginal benefits potential partners balance out. Incomplete information at marriage. People often get married often through they don't have complete information about their partner. As they accumulate more information during the marriage, they may realize that their partner is not an optimal match. Divorce as a rational decision. If new information makes the marriage less optimal, divorce may become the best option. Divorce are more likely to occur early in the marriage because that's when information about the partner is still being revealed. Impact or unexpected events, unforeseen change such as a partner becoming unexpectedly successful. For example, becoming a movie star or facing unexpected challenges can increase the likelihoods of divorce, as these events may make the marriage less appealing or no longer optimal for one of the partners.
Monopsony in product market. A monopsony is a market condition in which there is only one buyer and they call the monophonies. A monopsony also has imperfect market conditions. In a monopsony, a single buyer generally has a controlling advantage that drives its consumption price levels down. And there are three main characteristics of monopsony. First, one firm purchasing all of the goods and service in a market. Second, no other buyers in the market. And third, the barriers to entry into the market.
Monopsony in product market. When will a monopsony produce? A firm will produce until MRP equal to MRC. Based on the graph, the monopsonies will move down the curve from MC to the supply curve to hire more people, which is from point A move to the point B at a lower wage, which is from point E move to point D, to create that weight loss, which is the yellow area that show in the graph. In conclusion, the Chicago School of Economics began in 1949 when Milton Friedman joined the University of Chicago. The Chicago School's strong belief in the market system of laissez-faire that benefited many corporate interests and high-income groups. Chicago School was valid, useful, and correct in its time because it helped to preserve the long legacy of classical, marginalist, and neoclassical microeconomics theory, while the Keynesian macroeconomics was dominating the intellectual scene, and keep alive the monetary views of Fisher during a period when they could have become permanently buried by the weight of Keynesian idea. That's all from our group. Thank you.